to try and leave the door open because it's really, really warm, isn't it? And it's the last session, it's the graveyard shift. So anything that I can do extra to help us all stay awake in the next hour is really good. We're aiming to finish at 5 past, so I'm going to get on it, if that's okay. If you don't know me, my name is Louisa Enstone, and I've put my Twitter handle on there. I've also put my email address on there because I am at the moment in the middle of peer review for this project, but in the next few months or so, I will be able to make all of the resources and research available. And so if you are interested in essay writing and what that looks like at secondary school, you're very welcome to email me, and I can share it directly with you before it goes into journals that are not always easy to get hold of, and before it goes to publishing, which then would require you to pay money for it. So it's louenstone@gmail.com, and you're very welcome to email me. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself because it kind of makes sense about why it is that I ended up doing this piece of master's research. I have been a teacher for the last 7 years, and prior to that spent 12 years working as a consultant, a tax consultant at Deloitte in the City of London. And so I have this very strange life experience where the early formative years of my adulthood have all been about spreadsheets and numbers and checking the numbers and being totally on it with the data and checking everyone else's data. And I had the real luxury of working with some of the biggest companies in the world and making sure their data was around everyone else's data. And then I moved into education, and I found that there's so much data, isn't there, in education, and yet it's not used well. It's all the wrong sorts of things that we're gathering, and for me, as when I was training as an English teacher, could not understand for the life of me why there was no research on teaching essay writing in English. There's loads of research on teaching reading, comprehension, decoding, fluency. Loads of research on teaching writing, imaginative writing, transactional writing, persuasive writing. As yet, no published research in this country on teaching essay writing out of reading, literary analysis. Tiny little bit in the subject of history, which is excellent. And again, once I put all of this on my blog for you, I'll put the links that are there. Tiny little bit in America, but the way that they write different essays is very different from the way that we write essays. And that's where this research project came from. So when I started my master's in education, you have to do like a mini, if any of you did a PGC, it's similar to the ones that you did then, a mini bit of field research that proved that you can think and be critical, and I started it, and it became this enormous animal that's an 18-month proper university-sponsored research project, which is what I present to you today. And it's all about structured essay writing, and to what extent, when we initially teach essay writing to year 7, should we be giving them that PEE structure, but then should we also be giving them a sentence phrase? And I'm treating that, and you'll show, when I show you what I did, that then becomes a little bit of a tangled web of when do we unpick our thinking. So this is somewhat ironically titled Stop Peeing, but really, for me, this has been all about finding beauty in looking in detail at what I've been doing in my classroom. Being given the opportunity and the time by my school and the university that I'm working with, which is St Mary's, to really look at how I improve as a classroom practitioner. Nothing that I'm going to share with you goes beyond my classroom, and when you look at all the biases and the mitigating factors that I'll talk to you about, I'll show how it's difficult to apply this. It might intuitively feel true, and you might recognise that some of my findings might match that, but this is a very small scale field research project, and we would require as a profession, and it's something that I'm talking to Nate about, talking to the English Media Studies, a large-scale research, intensive, long-term research project in the UK in secondary schools, looking at the quality of essay writing. looking at initial teaching of essay writing and looking at how we solve that problem, how we look at it, and I was working with this as my working hypothesis, that by teaching oversimplified techniques, whatever you call them, we eventually get to the point where we limit a student's opportunity to be sophisticated and cognitively advanced once they're in Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. So that was my working hypothesis, and that came from a truthism that grew inside of me as I was teaching, that the more times I gave out a PEE frame in Year 11, the less likely my students were to write something clever. And then as I have become an examiner and a coursework moderator, both at GCSE for literature and at A-level, and now I'm setting the new exams, seeing again and again and again lots of average ability students who seemingly are using the writer says, this suggests this, those very structured P frames and sentence starters, and any of you that teach the IGCSE will know that for a number of years a certain external organisation was recommending that you actually draw it out as a table in response to question 2. Thank goodness they're not recommending that anymore. That makes our students' written responses less clever than they are. That was my working hypothesis, and the whole point of my project was, could I prove what I felt intuitively in my classroom, what I was feeling, true through a very small research project. So I'm going to talk you through how that research project worked, I'll talk you through where I've got to. So the students that started this were in Year 7, last academic year, they're in Year 8. I've been given permission by my school to work with them in this control and test grouping until Christmas, but one of the problems is that for my control group, as you'll see, they've now had 18 months of secondary education only writing PEE frames, and I can't any longer morally keep going with this research, and that's why I'm presenting to you slightly prematurely, because I've not collected my final 2 sets of data. One set was written last week, I've got another one at Christmas, and then I'll call it a day, and that's when you'll get all of the final analysis. So what I'm presenting to you today is where I'm at now, the data that I've got. So many questions the minute I started thinking about this. So many questions arise. And these are just the 3 most important ones. But firstly, we have to ask the question, what is an essay? What purpose does it serve? Every question that they write in a GCSE or an A-level exam, does the essay have the same purpose? Does it look the same? Does it read the same? How can we judge what makes a good essay? And that was a tricky one for me, trying to come up with decent analytical data. How do I judge that? Whose subjective opinion of what makes a good essay? All of you have done that when we look at a mark scheme and we go best fit, and you think, nah, that's not a C, and someone else in your department has moderated it and given it a C, and you're like, that issue of the subjectivity that comes, which is perhaps why as a profession we've not yet managed to do some real detailed research on this, because it's so much down to what feels like it's cognitively well written, sophisticated, articulate. Is it actually possible to look at an essay or a group of essays and create some kind of empirical, numerical, data-driven analysis of their quality? And again, you'll see the stumbling blocks that I came up against when I was trying to do that. These 3 questions were the ones that I decided to focus on. I did a lot of thinking about the other ones, but these are the ones that I wanted to look at. Is there a difference between using PEE and the like, and structuring ideas? Is there something in there about allowing students to have a way that they structure what they've written? Or is that PEE too prescriptive, too finite? So that was something that I wanted to look at. Can we give them a structure for their ideas without necessarily articulating it, giving it a label, PEE, PQE, petal, PES, everything? and sentence starters. And I put those two together because when I came to do my research, I wanted to do the most unstructured and the most structured, because there's two extremes. So the guys that were in the control group that got the structure got a very definite set of sentence starters as well as the PEE overview as the kind of like lowest common denominator. I'm putting it in those terms, but you'll see when I come to my findings later on that obviously it's never as black and white because English isn't, is it at all? And then AO's success criteria, I stumbled again and again with then the way that the prehistorical, the legacy GCSE mark schemes are written, they almost enforce PEE. The way that the mark schemes are written by the exam boards seemingly embeds that into your writing. It's different for the new GCSE, and I've been really pleased. If any of you, even if you don't teach Edexcel, I definitely recommend that you go look at some of their exemplar answers. Interestingly, some of their full mark answers aren't using anything that looks like PEE. Not quite got to the stage where it's okay to start a paragraph with a quote, but I'm beginning to ask those questions. The quality of the analysis, the quality of conceptual thought, the quality of getting in deep with the language and the structure. Well, if they're doing that, why not start a paragraph with the quote? Those rules that we've made for ourselves perhaps are shackles rather than things that bring freedom. Those are my questions. I asked a whole bunch of questions. In answer to that big one though, I needed to ask and tackle with the idea that essays are a form of writing that are so deeply unfamiliar to everybody, particularly children. There's not many people that read non-fiction for pleasure regularly, and even those of us that do will tend to read non-fiction that is biographical, autobiographical, informational, rather than reading essays. We'll sit down and engage with a research paper or a journal or a nice book of research, but we're not doing that for pleasure. And so when we look at our 11-year-olds, we need to recognise the fact that they don't know what an essay is. And any of you that have ever worked in primary sector or look at the primary sector, you know that when they arrive in your school, if they've taken the level 5 Key Stage 2 SATs, the highest numerical mark that you can get on the level 5 paper is 4 marks, and in order to do that they only have to write 2 sentences. It's possible to get 4 marks for the highest mark question on that paper, writing 2 sentences. Level 6 paper isn't that different. And we rock up, here you are guys, let's read Blessing, come on. It's a poem about hope. How does the writer show hope in this? PEE frame. What's an essay? Well then, it shows their understanding. It shows their understanding of the text in reference to a specific question. What do we use an essay for? Explain things, interpret things, discuss things, explore things, analyse things, compare things, connect things to the outside world, connect things to themselves, connect things to things elsewhere in literature. Such a wide-ranging text that they're being asked to create, all the while expected that they can naturally do that and step into another pair of shoes that sounds a little bit like a stuffy old man in a university in his smoking jacket. The author's use of anaphora suggests that Dr. Jekyll is in fact trying to convince himself that everything... I can't imagine how unnaturally that comes. No matter how many times I give them the sentence starter, the word suggests, I'm going to grapple with the tone, the style and the content. So after all of this thinking, you can imagine I was there going, okay, this is hot. How can I possibly do something that is valid here? And again, that's going to be your judgment, really, as to whether what I have come up with is valid. Right. Stream focus then. Because I'm a slightly chaotic thinker, the spreadsheets that I create are chaotically full of information. So it might be nicely structured in a spreadsheet, but it is still chaotic. I needed to limit myself and give myself that extreme focus. And so again, this is why I'm emphasising, although these results are valid for me and my school and my classroom, I don't think necessarily that it would be accurate or fair to me to say that they're applicable across every classroom of every age group. But I think there's some interest there and something perhaps it would be nice for us to look at as a profession. Right then, the context. So, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably know some of the comedy comments that I make about my school. My school, and I'm not being recorded so I can say this, I work in the London Borough of Bromley, which is the affluent, white area of those people who are in this new technical middle class. So the students at my school, we've got a school of just coming up this September, we'll have 3,000 students aged 11 to 18. We're a big school, 12 tutor groups in every year, about 280 students in each year group. It's not the biggest school that I've worked in. I've worked in one of those mega collegiate schools where there are different schools within a school. Something that London, it's relatively, for those of you that, it's not abnormal. My daughter's in a local school where we live in Lewisham. She goes to a girls' school that's got 2,300 girls in it. So it's not unusual. But what's very unusual about my school is that we have a catchment area, imagine that, 3,000 students, of 0.9 of a mile. So we draw, we're in Orpington really, when I say Bromley, most people haven't heard of Orpington. We draw these students from a very small, affluent area. The average house price of houses in that area is just hit £900,000. These kids are massively well off. You know, they rock up from their 5-minute journey to school in those mega BMW 4x4s that are, you know, bigger than just 4 people could ever fit in. Their parents, by and large, are professionally qualified in what we would have previously seen as being low-skilled jobs. So by and large, their dads work in construction, they're electricians, they're plumbers, they've got jobs that make them a lot of money, because we do nothing but build houses in South East London. But they're not necessarily people that value reading, value school. By and large, most parents, when I meet them at parents' evenings, parents' information evenings, go, oh yeah, I hated Shakespeare when I was at school. I don't like reading. Or they'll say, I found school really hard, I don't know how to help my child. It's that difficulty that we have. Very well off, very affluent, very culturally poor. So, I had last year on my timetable 2 Year 7 classes for 1 hour a week. So I was selectively given 2 classes on either half of the year who were exactly the same sets. And we have 5 sets on each half of the year, and I had set 2 for 1 hour a week. 32 students in each class, every single one of them had got level 5 on their reading SAT paper. 1 student had been given a level 6 moderated for his writing, but otherwise they were high ability. A relatively average mix of boys and girls. What I did then, as part of this research project, is that over the 3 terms, because I was only seeing them 1 hour a week, I then taught 3 bespoke units of work. Started off in the first term with a short story. After that we did other cultures' poetry. Then we did a play version of Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders of Rue Morgue. And finally they did a summer exam, which was an unseen poem. So I then had 4 sets of data that I could look at across Year 7. This term, they're reading the novel The Giver, and they've just written assessment on that for me. And in the run-up to Christmas, they're going to have done something on war poetry. So those are the 5 pieces, 5 units, 5 pieces of data that I've got. They've all come from our new knowledge-based Key Stage 3 curriculum, which again I share quite widely on my blog, and if you can't find, it's on my Twitter, so you can find all the access to that. In addition to having that data then, I surveyed the students, and I'll show you some of the questions that I asked them later on, about what their experience of writing an essay was, how they felt. And you know, we saw that earlier, didn't we, where Rayland was talking about the uncomfortable place of doing something that you find new and tricky. And obviously this was like a year-long experience of living in an uncomfortable place for those students that were in my control group. The analysis then of the data at the moment, and again it's all being typed up by St Mary's University, so this might change slightly, but at the moment we're analysing the literal length of response in terms of numbers of words. So how many words have each student from the PEE group and from the test group written in every response, to see whether there's something there limiting them in terms of word length. We've analysed the number of analytical words that each one used in a predefined set, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we've given a quality of analysis score out of 20, which is actually predefined by the Edexcel Key Stage 3 mark scheme. Because we teach Edexcel for GCSE and A-level, we've implemented their mark scheme, which mirrors the GCSE mark scheme in Key Stage 3, and the requirements of my data at school has required me to use that. And so that was the mark that we gave them and the quality judgment that they gave them. And by and large, it's pretty similar to the GCSE one. So, you know, are they saying something perceptive? Are they saying something insightful? It's the sorts of things that we're used to, and therefore I felt comfortable using it. This was the analytical language that we have decided to mark for, and that's because these students were in, before they were settled at the end of, before they were put in sets, they had 3 weeks where they were taught in their tutor groups, and this was given to them as spelling homework. So all of the students in Year 7 had been given these analytical words to learn as part of their homework, so I didn't feel like I was skewing my data massively by using them because it had been applied to both groups. Mitigating factors then, so the things that made the problem with my data. Obviously they have other English lessons with other English teachers. So what I'm teaching them isn't their only experience of English, and it certainly wasn't their only experience of essay writing. And they then did also have to participate in other internal assessments with their main class teacher. I was doing something a little bit special, and so they actually had a higher summative assessment load than other classes in that year group, and so that again might have skewed it. The way that we protected that was that neither of those teachers used specific essay writing planning or structures other than what I was teaching with those classes. So the main teacher for my control group, which was the one that did PEE and had the sentence starters, used what I produced, something that I had taught them they were familiar with. The poor main teacher of the test group then used literally nothing, because that's what I was doing. And again, her experience and my experience of this is very different, because she then was in a very uncomfortable space, because that was something that she was being asked to do. Another mitigating factor is that our school prints the PEE frame into the students' planners. I never drew attention to it, but it was there. Also, about 3 or 4 of those students had parents who were either primary school teachers or English teachers, and those are the sorts of parents that check their books, aren't they? So again, I'm not saying it was a mitigating factor, but it could have been. Finally, it became apparent as the year went on that some amazing Year 6 teachers had done some transition units in one of our feeder primary schools after they'd sat their SAT, and they'd had an introduction to PEE. Now again, that has not necessarily, as far as I can see, skewed my findings, but it's there. The main one that I have worries about, and again we have looked at it with the university, the data is that under the in-house assessment and data collection, I was required to give marking feedback and targets to all these students on these pieces of work, which meant I had to give the totally 3 students targets for how they can improve, and I'll show you a little bit later how I try to do that without giving away the secrets, because then that would have been a waste of time. Alright, so I've explained this real quick. So one group had PEE structure and sentence starters. The other group had literally nothing, and I'll show you what I mean. So lessons 1 to 6 then, of each of the units was exactly the same for both classes. And this is just an example of that first unit, which is based on William DeMille's story Ruthless. And that unit is on my blog, and I'll make sure I've put it back to the top for you. It's brilliant, this story, if you've never read it. The essay was, how does William DeMille present the character of Judson Webb, who's the main character in Ruthless? And the first 6 lessons that both class has were exposition. Generally chatting, talking about the main idea. The law of unintended consequences was important, so we talked through that. We did a character analysis of Judson Webb, worked out what sort of person he was, looked at the narrative point of view, did some of that analysis, did a Socratic seminar debate. After those 6 lessons, that was when I then diverged, and one group got very specific planning towards this essay and one group didn't. So, the control group, they got a very structured plan across 2 hours of a lesson. So I gave them a whole hour to talk about their ideas about Judson Webb. I told them that they needed to find quotes to prove their idea. We talked through analysis and what that is, the word this suggests. They wrote that up. Got all of their ideas, highlighted the ones that they really liked. I then talked to them about what an essay was and what PEE is. They got that from me, you know, copy out words from the text. What does this word mean? They also then got an example of what an essay paragraph looks like, and they had to annotate it and write a list of all of the things that they needed to include. That was their little success criteria. And because I wanted to kill this pig properly dead, I turned the whole thing, all of that amazing discussion that we had across 8 hours, into a gap fill exercise. Here you go, guys. There are your sentence starters. Just put your ideas in. Write me 4 paragraphs. And of course they did. I then repeated that when we came to do poetry from other cultures. We did 6 hours of looking at poems. Then, because I'm really unkind, I gave them Night of the Scorpion as an unseen. They planned that across 2 hours. Lots of discussion with me. The same thing. The same thing with Edgar Allan Poe. Not quite the same with the summer exam, but in the summer exam they'd been set homework to learn their PEE frame because they would need it for their exam, in the same way that everyone else in Year 7 had. You know, you've got your exam, you're going to have to write it on a poem, go learn your sentence starters. I taught them, because we explicitly model things, how to write their analysis. So this is me going through how you write a point, how you embed your quotations so that they're in nice sentences, how you include your analysis. Furthermore, it seems, on the other hand, how you then go with the author's ideas and the reader's response. So they had that in their books, nice copied out model paragraph. They had literally everything that they needed, and some of the ones that were super smart did in fact not use my quote, but come up with something that wasn't massively dissimilar to that. Because if you're a, your 11-year-old boy, and you've got the whole internalised thing that if I change it enough so that it sounds like mine, it's still a gap fill. The test group then. So they got the same 6-hour introduction. Then they got a whole bunch of freedom about how we discuss the ideas. And I was very limited with myself about what sorts of questions I asked them, allowed them to do. So all of their preparation was me asking, what do you think we should include? Here's the essay question. Where do we start? What can you tell me about the character? And they wrote it on the tables, they wrote it on post-it notes, we did a massive post-it note plan, then we categorised them all, but that was all then. Can you tell me anything else? Where do we go now? That was what their planning sheet looked like. This was the most tricky one. You know, what could we include? What should we include? There are, you know, high ability sets. By and large, they said things that were sensible. What's your opinion of how we should write this up? Was the tricky one. And look how much they sound like Year 6 kids, neatly. Formal language. They got that, even though they've not seen anything. How should we write this up? We should use formal language, miss. It's literally like they were like those nodding dogs. Okay, what else do you need to talk about when you're talking about something, a text that's been written? The writer's intention. It's like they were regurgitating the AFs for me. And I got all of that. Okay, where are you getting that idea from, I would ask? And then they talked to me about something that they'd done in Year 6 to prepare for the stats. And in a lot of ways, exploiting that was perhaps one of the areas of success for this group. What do you mean? What did your teacher do when you were asked that? Tell me about that. Everybody else, okay, what do we think? Should we write this down? Is this a good idea? If it's a good idea, put it on your plan. Because those stats papers are split into the AFs, AF2. Finding it all out. And those memories of that internalised process then brought into what they wanted to say. So, to confirm then, they did not get any exemplar materials. They did not get any guidance from me on what should be included. Just the poking. What else? What do you think? What's the best idea that we've heard today? Have a think about it quietly for 5 minutes. What else can we come up with? How can you prove that? Are you sure that's correct? They didn't get any guidance about what to write, when, and where it should go. So there's no structural guidance from me about how it was written up or should be written up at all. They then decided, after all this, and this took longer, they didn't get 2 hours, they had more than that, that they needed, and this was the success criteria, so this is what was projected on my whiteboard when they were writing it. They needed to say something about Judson Webb's character, and then they clarified that, what sort of person is he? They needed to use examples from the story to show this. They needed to explain why those examples were related to their idea, and then they were all very definite that they needed to make sure their ideas were clear, and for some of them that meant neat handwriting, and for the girls that meant trying to write more. And that was it. Oh, we can't see that. Okay, I'm going to take you through my findings. How am I doing on time?
We've got 15.
Excellent.
Sorry, what was the actual essay title you gave?
So the essay title was, for this one here that I showed you at the beginning, how does William DeMille present the character of Judson Webb in Read This? The one for the Other Cultures Poetry was looking at the idea of religion in Night from the Scorpion. For Edgar Allan Poe, we did the setting at the beginning of Paris. The summer one was an unseen poem called Snake, but not the one that they used for GCSE, another one, and it was about the presentation of the animal. So we've tried to cover throughout the year, in terms of how we set our assessments, character, theme, setting, so that we go through the same things that come up over and over again. Okay. So, this is their results. The way that we have transferred the Edexcel mark scheme is into the Pixel steps, because as a school we use Pixel, but I haven't actually used any of their terminology for these. So just to give you some kind of reference, step 4 is roughly equitable with achieving or being secure in a level 5, APP AF level 5. So you can see there that by and large, not too dissimilar amount of students gained were writing at the level that they had gained at the end of year 6, which was good, considering when they sit their SATs, it's actually in the middle of year 6. But the control group, the PEE group, 16 students got a higher level, step 5, 1 student accessed step 6, which was the highest one available for this. Whereas here, we had much more students writing the lower grade. It's not unsurprising for me that the control group, the ones that were the sentence starters, did what I asked them to do. They're year 7, they're new in school, they're well trained, they follow instructions, they had it all there, they just needed to write it up. What did surprise me was how many students did well in this group, considering how uncomfortable they felt about it, and I'll show you the results of that later. When I did the student survey, every single time, and even again this week in year 8, the students who are in the control group, the PEE group, have always said they feel more happy. Do you feel ready to write this essay? Yes. Are you comfortable? And the students in the test group have always said no and still say no. It's interesting, isn't it? So, do you know what an essay is? Do you know what needs to be included in a paragraph? How do you write, and do you know how to write an essay paragraph? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, how confident do we feel about writing this essay? And that's that first set of data. Control group. Don't feel very comfortable at all. Sorry, the test group don't feel very comfortable. The control group are happy. Again, not unsurprising the first time round, but I'm still getting roughly the same results with that, which is interesting considering my following findings then. So my third finding was that students in the control group, on average, wrote less than students in the test group. So you saw the PEE frame that I gave them. It had a maximum of 8 sentences. By and large, students particularly that first time round and continually, students in the control group write 5 or 6 sentences. Students in the test group who have no frame write more. Some of that's, fluffy wool. Some of it now is a decent analysis. That's not a surprise either, is it? You think about it when you see your middle ability year 11s writing you a paragraph on something in a poem or in Animal Farm. They think they're done after they've written 3 sentences, PEE. And again, part of that is the narrative that we use to describe it. Students in the test group definitely used more imaginative and descriptive vocabulary within what they were considering to be analysis. So this student here, he says, and he's talking about the character in a short story, in a way he wants everything done straight away and doesn't think that the law will get the fee. So it proves that he thinks he's more important than the Prime Minister. Okay, because this man has decided that he can break the law, he's more important than the Prime Minister. That ability to be kind of imaginative and descriptive in the comparisons that they draw hadn't been taken away from them because I wasn't giving them those very prescriptive sentence starters which wouldn't have lent themselves necessarily to that. That also then, by equal measure, meant they were more likely to waffle at the very beginning, more likely to retell the story. But then kids do that anyway when they're writing PEE paragraphs, don't they? So it's a fine line. Now this one says, Judson's poor behaviour shines through his overcoat. In this essay, this little boy was saying that he put on like an overcoat of like hiding and secrecy, and he kept referring to it, and I loved it. And of course it was totally irrelevant, but I really like that. Students in the test group also then used more analytical words than students in the control group. Remember those 8 sentence starters that I had? 4 analytical words in there for them. These guys, using on average 6 or 7 in a piece of writing for me. Again, because they were writing more, they were using those words to explain. That one was surprising. Spring then. This is on the poetry. They're broadly comparable, as you can see. Roughly the same number of students achieving a step 4. Roughly the same number of students achieving a step 5. And more students now accessing that higher grade that I was really pleased with. Why that is, again, poetry, some of us would argue, because it's self-contained, because it's a short text, there's more opportunity for a student to feel comfortable with the content of what they're writing about. Although, as you know, I was very unkind about the way that I let them do that. They had to do that poem by themselves. I think there might be a little bit of the second time lucky thing. The test group, this was their second go at doing this. And so, you know, the only way is up. Other influences going on there could be the fact that by this point they've also participated in the other internal assessments that they were doing, so this wasn't the only other essay that they'd written. They'd looked at, in their non-fiction writing with the other teacher, formal writing and how you create a formal style and tone. So that there is all kind of going into it. Summer 1, so this is Edgar Allan Poe, and so this was done in late April, whenever after the Easter holidays was. Interesting. This was interesting because this is the first time that my test group, totally unstructured, outperformed. And by this point, I'd really resigned myself to having to come and speak to people and say you should be using PEE because they're doing better with it. And this piece of data made me stop and think, what is it that means that they're doing better now? And again, the fine analysis of that, because literally all of these essays are being typed up and it allows us to do better, more detailed analysis. At the moment it looks like they're still writing longer responses. Every time now they write an essay, they're using the word because more to explain an idea. Again, there's no space for that in my sentence frame that I gave them to say because. To even start a sentence with because, which sometimes I don't mind if they do that, because at least they've got something to say. They also are getting into what English literature is at secondary school. All of them have more interesting ideas to say. They weren't then now little year 6 students that are desperately trying to please the teacher by being the first to put their hand up and maybe not having anything useful to say. They're now all trained to stop and think, what's the most deep thing that I can say? What's my best idea? I also think, and when I publish it and we have all of the language that's used, their freedom of expression allowed them to be more analytical. It was also more imaginative, also more descriptive, but in all of that, there was deep analysis, fine word level analysis, explanations of the uses of dashes, ellipses. The summer exam. So this was an unseen exam done in the hall, at exam tables in 1 hour along with everybody else in their year group. So this was the kind of ultimate control. An unseen poem, and they were given some comprehension questions that they needed to ask. answer, and then an essay response that was worth 20 marks at the end. This is just the essay response. See how my PEE group have stagnated. Absolutely delighted that they managed to do this on an unseen poem, but what they wrote was very formulaic. The snake is afraid of the humans. For example, he slithers away. He slithers away shows he's afraid of the humans. These guys, they had all of that. Oh, I've got an example for you. Let me show it to you. Hold on, let me just find this. Oh, where is it? Here we go. So the snake's described as smooth, makes the reader imagine the poem as a long, smooth snake's body curling around, looping back over each other. Also, the word smoothness lets your mind think of a very powerful, smooth object, such as freshly waxed legs, or a piece of glass from a window. It's analysis, isn't it? Now, I'm not saying that this young lady, and I can assure you she was a young lady, was one of the students that was up here. But she's getting, there's something there about them having internalised what this is all about. What on earth is going on? They don't feel comfortable with it yet. And they are going to be absolutely delighted when I finally introduce them to PEE. But in a way, it will suddenly go, oh, I get it now. I'm just going to give them the structure. I'm going to give them the sentence starters, make a point. Something that is not obvious in the text, show something deeper. Then you put your evidence in, then you do all the other stuff that you've been doing. I also think that they were more confident because they didn't have that crutch. So they weren't like the students that had the PEE sentence starters that went into that exam going, I must write this, and then I write this, and then I write this. They were allowed to sit for a minute and think, and then have the freedom of expression. So, my overall conclusions at this stage are, and where we look like we're going in our department in terms of the initial teaching of essay writing, like all babies, they need something that holds them together. And it hasn't felt fair for me at times with that test group to leave them so totally exposed, so totally open to failure. And I don't think in other schools this project would have been as successful as it is, and I'm really lucky that I've got so many beautifully well-behaved, engaged students that love learning and like being in classrooms. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think it's tricky to apply what I've seen across multiple contexts. Certainly wouldn't see this in my old school in Croydon. But at the moment, I feel like the babies need something more than I gave them in the test group. But what I need to work out very definitely is what the difference between giving a structure is and putting them in a cage. Because some of that imaginative, descriptive analysis wouldn't have come out if I'd just done the, ooh, let's look at this text. Here's a PEE. Table, frame. And so I need to find that balance, and that's what I'm going to be looking at next. So, that's all I've got to say really. We've got 1 minute. If you've got any questions, immediately. Otherwise, you're really welcome to email me, get in hold of me. I will try and put all of this on my blog. You've got a... Yes? Have you got a question? Yes?
What are your contact details?
Oh, so, here we are. So, Lou Enstone at Gmail to email me, or find me on Twitter. Yes?
It's a comment really. It's really, really interesting to see this. I mean, how many in a year group?
So
12.
we have, so there are 12 tutor groups and 10 English classes in a year group.
So you're saying you're doing this with a very high achievement.
So yeah,
group,
so
the
they're
top
second
set.
sets, but they are all students that access level 5.
Yeah. So you could try. I mean, you would have had totally different things.
So this is the really, and again, this is why I've said it's not applicable.
Yeah.
I teach, when they're in year 10 and 11, there are 12 sets on each side of the year group, and my year 11 class last year was set 12 of 12, and they were illiterate to the extent that I was still teaching them to read the week before the exam. And so obviously that's why I'm saying this isn't applicable in every situation, but what I now do is think very carefully about how quickly I give them sentence starters. My year 11s had sentence starters when they went into their exam. They had them laminated on little cards that their homework was to learn them off by heart before they went into their exams. And so there is some practicality and common sense in there again, which is why I think we need a national research project on it. If you'd be interested in participating in one, do let Nate know. Thank you guys.